I've been thinking about whether or not I should share this story with anyone outside of family for years. It's one of those things that's never really left me, even after all this time. I figure you might appreciate it. This happened back in the mid-90s, when I was still in high school. I was fishing off the coast of Corpus Christi with my uncle and 2 cousins. My uncle had a 38-foot boat, and we were about 18 miles out into the Gulf. We'd been out there all day, catching fish, checking traps, and just the usual stuff. It was around 8 p.m. when we decided to start heading back. This was before daylight saving time, so the sun was already down, and it was getting dark fast. I was at the stern, pulling in the last trap before we headed in. That's when I noticed something strange in the water, about 100 to 150 feet away from the boat. At first I thought maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me, but I could tell something was there. It was glowing. The best way I can describe it is like the orange heating elements inside of a toaster, but underwater. It was this deep, steady glow. Nothing flickering, nothing flashing, just a solid, soft orange light. And it was big, really big. Our boat was 38 feet, and whatever this was had to be at least 5 to 6 times that size, maybe more. It wasn't at the surface, but it was close enough that I could see how the water above it was slightly disturbed, like it was pushing the water upward without breaking through. It wasn't churning or bubbling, just a soft disturbance, if that makes sense. And I froze, completely froze. You know that feeling when you're walking outside at night and suddenly something jumps out, a stray cat or a possum. That split second where your body just locks up. And that's exactly how I felt, only this lasted much longer. And I just stood there, holding the trap line in one hand, staring at this glowing thing in the water. And I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Finally, I managed to call out to my uncle. He came around to the stern, stood next to me, and just stared. Neither of us said a word for what felt like forever. He wasn't the kind of guy who got rattled easily. He'd been fishing these waters his whole life, but he had that same frozen look on his face. Then, just like that, the thing took off. It did not build up speed or anything like you'd expect. It just shot out toward the open Gulf in an instant, gone in seconds. No splash, no sound, just that glow disappearing into the distance. I finally broke the silence and asked my uncle, "Have you ever seen anything like that before?" He just shook his head and said, "Nope, let's go." And that was it. No discussion, no theories, nothing. On the ride back, we did not say a single word to each other. My cousins kept asking what happened, but all my uncle said was, nothing. I did not sleep that night. Hell, I did not sleep much for the next few nights. I couldn't get it out of my head. For years, I tried to figure out what it was. When the internet became more accessible, I started searching online. I found a lot of stories from people who'd seen something similar. This strange glowing object in the water, always silent, always fast. Some mentioned the naval base nearby, but there aren't any known submarine operations down there. At least, not officially. I spent years obsessing over it, trying to figure out what we saw that night. I still think about it from time to time. It never felt like something from this world, but if it was some kind of military technology, then it's technology we've been sitting on for a long time. Technology that could change everything. I've never told many people about it, mainly because no one will believe me, but I'll never forget what we saw that night. It was real. I saw it with my own eyes. Whatever it was, it's out there. Anyway, thanks for letting me get this off my chest. Take care, Anonymous. I used to work as a deck officer on cargo ships, mainly in the South Pacific. For those who've never been out there, it's impossible to understand just how vast and empty the ocean really is. You could sail for weeks without seeing another ship, plane, or anything at all. It's easy to forget how isolated you really are until something strange reminds you. This happened to me about 7 years ago. We were running a routine voyage, delivering supplies to small Pacific islands. It was not a glamorous job, but I liked it well enough. We had been skirting around some storms for days. I've been watching the radar closely because the storms were everywhere, big ones. Our path was clear though, with calm seas and perfect visibility. It was early afternoon when I first saw it. At first, it was just a dot on the horizon. I assumed it was debris, a piece of driftwood or an old buoy. But as we got closer, I realized that it was a raft. A strange one too. Bamboo lashed together with what looked like rope or vines, the kind you'd expect to see in some survival movie. It had a snapped mast lying across the deck and an empty red cooler tied down next to it. I called over the captain and a few of the crew. Nobody said anything for a few moments as we stared at it. There wasn't a soul on board, no sign of anyone swimming nearby, no personal belongings except for that cooler. Just the raft, rocking gently on the calm water. It looked weathered, like it had been out there for weeks, maybe longer. The captain decided we should circle around it to get a better look. I grabbed my binoculars and scanned it closely. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The cooler was half open, and inside, there were a few empty water bottles and some food wrappers. Fresh food wrappers. Not ancient, some bleached trash like you'd expect. These had been recently used. We all exchanged looks. The captain radioed our company to report what we found. And technically, we were supposed to investigate further, maybe even try to tow it or board it to check for survivors. But nobody was eager to volunteer. The thing about the ocean is that it's not like finding an abandoned car on the side of the road. There's no easy explanation for why a raft like that would be out there, this far from any islands or major shipping routes. Where did the person or people go? Did they get rescued? Did they jump overboard? Were they still out there somewhere, floating in a life jacket, just beyond our view? I could tell by the silence that everyone else was thinking the same thing. In the end, the captain made the call to log the sighting and keep moving. We had a schedule to stick to, and stopping to investigate an abandoned raft wasn't part of it. Still, the whole thing stuck with me for the rest of the shift. I kept scanning the horizon, half expecting to see someone waving for help or floating face down in the water. But there was nothing, just the endless ocean. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying it in my head, trying to make sense of it. I even went back up on deck to check if the raft was still visible, but it had already disappeared into the darkness. The Pacific is like that. It swallows things whole and leaves no trace. For the rest of the voyage, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had missed something important. What if there was someone out there, clinging to life and we had just sailed right past them. I kept thinking about the raft, the empty cooler, and the fresh wrappers. How long ago had someone been sitting on that raft, hoping to be found? The scariest part wasn't the raft itself. It was the silence. No answers, no explanations. Just the realization that we were completely alone out there, hundreds of miles from the nearest land, surrounded by nothing but endless water. In a place that big, it's easy for things and people to disappear without a trace. I've sailed those waters many times since that, but I've never seen anything like that raft again. Still, every time I'm on watch, I find myself scanning the horizon a little more carefully, and just in case. Once you've seen something like that, you can't help but wonder how many other things are out there, drifting in the emptiness, waiting to be found, or never to be seen again. I thought I'd share something that happened to me a few years back when I was working on a car carrier in the Middle East. It's one of those moments that stuck with me, and probably always will. This was about 4 years ago. Our typical route took us through pirate waters every now and then, so it was standard practice to pick up 4 ex-Marines as security in Aqaba, Jordan, right before heading into riskier areas. They'd be on board, armed and ready, just in case anything went down. Most of the time, it was uneventful, routine even, but every once in a while, things got tense. One particular night, we were passing through waters off the coast of Yemen when we started having issues with the main engine. Not exactly an ideal situation in pirate waters. The chief engineer made a call to stop the ship and drift while they worked on figuring out the problem. Not much you can do in that situation except wait. I was on the stern of the vessel at the time, working on some minor maintenance. It was quiet back there, just the low hum of the ship's auxiliary systems and the sound of water lapping against the hull. The deck lights were dim, just enough to see what you were doing, but not much more than that. I wasn't really thinking about much, just killing time. Then, for some reason, I grabbed the spotlight. Maybe it was boredom, maybe it was instinct. Either way, I clicked it on and swept it across the water. That's when I saw him. About 15 feet from the ship, there was this little rusted boat bobbing in the water, and in it was a man holding a gun, just staring right at me. It took a second for my brain to catch up with what I was seeing. He wasn't yelling or waving the gun around. He wasn't panicking or trying to hide. He just sat there, calm and steady, watching me like he'd been there for a while. His eyes locked on mine, and I froze. I thought about going for the radio to call one of the Marines, but my gut told me not to. I figured if I moved too suddenly, he might take that as a threat. And honestly, at that distance, he probably could have taken a shot and hit me if he wanted to. We just stared at each other for what felt like forever. It was one of those weird moments where everything else kind of fades out. No sound, no movement, just me and him, eyes locked. Then, after what couldn't have been more than 10 seconds, but felt a lot longer, he gave me this little nod. Not a big, dramatic gesture, just a small, subtle nod. It felt almost like he was saying, "Well played." I don't know why, but I nodded back. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe I just wanted him to leave. Either way, he seemed satisfied with that. He slowly turned the boat around and rowed back into the darkness. The spotlight followed him for a few seconds before he disappeared completely into the black water. I stood there for a minute, trying to process what had just happened. I did not know if he was alone, or if there were more of them nearby. I did not know if they were planning something bigger, or if he just gotten too close out of curiosity. As soon as I lost sight of him, I grabbed the radio and called it in. The Marines were on deck in seconds, scanning the water with their weapons ready, but by then it was too late. The boat was gone. I spent the rest of the night on edge, constantly checking the water every chance I got. Nothing else happened, and by morning, the engine was fixed, and we were on our way again like nothing had ever happened. But I still think about that guy sometimes. I can remember his face perfectly, the deep, focused look in his eyes. He wasn't scared, he wasn't angry, he was just watching. I've been through that area a few times since then, but I've never seen him again. To this day, I don't know what his intentions were. Maybe he was just scouting the ship, maybe he was alone, or maybe there were others waiting nearby. I'll never know. But I can tell you this, I'll never forget that moment, standing there with a spotlight on him, wondering if I was about to be a part of a very different story.